Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 371 Serving as a Lobbyist. In the Roman Basilica of Lantra, Julius II's anger gradually subsided, and he was in the mood to grab milk tea with Marin. The father-in-law and son-in-law chatted while drinking, and then talked about Venice. Julius II took a sip of milk tea and asked casually, "Marin, I heard that you have a good relationship with the Venetians." Marin was stunned, but still replied, "Indeed, in 1494. We ambushed Charles VIII together." In fact, this is an official statement. The real situation is that Marin ambushed Charles VIII's heavy cavalry corps alone, but in the end he sold half of the prisoners of war, horses and plate armor to the Venetian tycoons. If it weren't for the millions of gold coins he got from selling prisoners of war, horses and plate armor to Venice, Marin would not have been able to rise and annex East Frisia just by relying on a small North Sea island, Texel Island. It can be said that the battle that ambushed Charles VIII changed Marin's life. Of course, it also changed Venice. Relying on the false, glorious military exploits of defeating King Charles VIII of France, the Venetians established a strong prestige in Italy. Except for a few senior officials of the Republic of Venice, most Venetians did not know that the beautiful ambush 10 years ago had little to do with Venice. The deceived Venetian people thought that Venice's military strength was strong enough to compete with the European hegemon France. Therefore, the citizens of Venice now walk sideways in Italy. These Venetians who did not know the truth regarded the Republic of Venice as the American Empire of Italy, and looked down on people from other Italian states. Although, because of Marin's intervention, when Julius II ascended the throne as Pope, he had a powerful army of 7,000 people, which was much stronger than in history. However, because of Marin's handwriting at the time, the Venetians were full of confidence and felt that they were the contemporary American Empire and could walk sideways in Italy. So, even though Julius II became more powerful, the Republic of Venice still occupied the Rimini region, including the historic city of Ravenna, as it had done in history. Moreover, the Venetians believed that with the strength of the Papal State, it was impossible to retake the Rimini region. By the way, you were just a phalanx captain at the time, right? How did you think of leaving the main force of the Austrian army and rushing to Fornovo to participate in that battle? Count Alfred, Habsburg family, did not want to lead his troops to attack without the emperor present, but the Italian coalition forces frequently asked Austria to send troops. So, I simply took the initiative to ask for battle at that time, and took my phalanx to act as reinforcements. Then how did you judge that the French army was going to escape, and set an ambush on the mountain road where the French army escaped? Are you so sure that the French will take that mountain road? Julius II continued to ask with interest. It's very simple. In fact, I didn't know at the beginning that the French would be the main force to escape. In fact, Marin knew it, because he had read history. At that time, I judged that the French were eager to return home and might not be able to defeat the Italian coalition forces, so they might escape in the middle of the night. So, I simply set an ambush in the middle of the night. Anyway, even if the French didn't escape, at most I would leave my men to catch nothing. If the bet is right, then. Julius II nodded. Indeed, this kind of gamble would have no loss if lost, but would be a step to the sky if won. It was a very cost-effective deal. But Julius II continued to ask, it's the same question. Even if the French escaped, how can you be sure that the French will take that mountain road? Maybe they will take another route. It's very simple. At that time, the French had only two ways to retreat. One was the mountain road where I set an ambush, and the other was the plain road on the Taro River. When the French army and the Italian coalition forces went to war, I sent people to dig up the embankment of the Taro River and flooded the road on the plain. In this way, the French can only take the mountain road where I ambush. It's really a good trick. Julius II was shocked by Marin's handwriting. In order to lure the French into the trap, they dug up the riverbank without saying a word. By the way, how did your phalanx get mixed up with the Venetian army? It's very strange. According to Venice, they had a team of 2,000 or 3,000 people who got lost on the way to reinforce and encountered your phalanx. Then, those 2,000 or 3,000 people were willing to accept your command. This is not normal. Your phalanx is only more than 1,000 people, and the Venetians have 2,000 or 3,000 people. Why should they listen to you, the leader of a small phalanx? Julius II was a little confused. Of course Julius II couldn't figure it out, because the so-called Venetian army of 2,000 or 3,000 people did not exist at all. Marin's troops only had one phalanx, plus more than 1,000 Italian peasants used to scare the French and pretend to be reinforcements. Marin thought about it and felt that Julius II was one of his own, and that they were in the secret room of the Lateran temple, with no outsiders present. The attendant who made tea had gone out, so he decided to tell Julius II the truth. Giuliano, in fact, there was no Venetian army at all. In that ambush, from beginning to end, there was only my army. What? Impossible. According to the French who were captured later, there was indeed an Italian army coming to reinforce, and the number was indeed 2,000 or 3,000. What Julius II said was that Marin arranged more than 1,000 Italian peasants, each holding 2 torches, and the team walked sparsely, looking like a few thousand soldiers. And Charles VIII was scared and ran away because he misunderstood that the Italian coalition was chasing him. Moreover, it was indeed difficult to see at night. If the French knights really stayed to fight to the death, Marin's men might be defeated. Marin told Julius II exactly how he used more than 1,000 captured Italian peasants to disguise as reinforcements. Julius II was stunned. Can the war be fought like this? After a long time, Julius II reacted, You are really a genius in fighting. Marin was a little embarrassed by the praise. How could he be a genius? It was just that there was a great explosion of knowledge in later generations, and he read too many related books and technical posts, so he understood so much. Putting aside the vast amount of advanced knowledge in later generations, Marin was just an ordinary person with an above-average IQ. Later, I sold half of the captives, horses and armor to the wealthy Venetians, and earned millions of gold coins. As for the 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers in Venice, those were all lies that were fabricated later. Julius II sighed, You are so brave. If Maximilian I knew that you sold spoils worth millions of gold coins, he would have to kill you. You also know that Maximilian I is the one who needs money the most. And the Habsburg family is also a big family that spends money very well. What's the matter? I had already made plans to escape at that time. With hundreds of thousands of gold coins, I could live comfortably wherever I go. If it really didn't work out, I was planning to buy a fiefdom in England and become a small noble. Anyway, Maximilian I's influence was only in the German region. No wonder you have a good relationship with the Venetians. It turns out that you are in cahoots with each other and have deceived the whole world. Don't say such ugly things, okay? We each got what we needed at that time. I wanted money, and the Venetians wanted fame. Well, since you have a good relationship with the Venetians, then I would like to ask you to do me a favor. Julius II said seriously. What is it? Represent me and the Holy See to negotiate with the Venetians and see if we can use peaceful means to make the Venetians voluntarily give up the Rimini area. This is very difficult. Marin hesitated. It is extremely difficult to persuade a profiteer country like Venice to spit out the meat in its mouth. Nonsense, why would I ask you if it's not difficult? I like to hear that. Okay, I'll take it. I'll go to Venice, but I can't guarantee whether it will work. It's okay, just give it a try. If it fails, don't we still have the option of war? Chapter 372, The Suez Canal Project. A few days later, Marin received news of the war in West Frisia. However, there was no news that the Saxon coalition was defeated soon. Duke George has been much more cautious this time since his last defeat, and he is not reckless. And Bonitz, the commander of the army of the Principality of Guedes, also wants to use the fortified city to consume the morale of the Saxon coalition. Therefore, there will be no results in a short time. Of course, this short time refers to 3 to 5 days. If it drags on for too long, neither side will be happy. Because it is already February. Next month, that is, March, it will enter the spring plowing stage. Both sides are obviously unwilling to affect the spring plowing because of the war. Therefore, after the initial trial stage, there will inevitably be a fierce collision. By March, the outcome will inevitably be clear. By then, Marin can also go back to preside over the spring plowing plan. By the way, talk to the defeated George about the purchase of West Frisia. After reading the intelligence from the country, Marin also planned to leave for Venice. This time, he went to negotiate with Venice as a mediator, with the written authorization of Julius II. Before leaving, Marin suddenly said to Julius II, Giuliano, I plan to encourage Venice to dig a canal to the Arabian Sea in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Julius II was stunned, but after opening the map drawn by Marin, his face changed. Marin, do you want Venice to rise completely? If Venice rises completely, won't the Holy See be suppressed to death? Venice now occupies 2 large islands close to Egypt, Crete and Cyprus. If the Venetians and the Egyptians dig a canal connecting the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, Julius II can be sure that Venice will develop more rapidly and more difficult to contain than it is now. Giuliano, don't get excited, listen to my explanation first. Marin pointed to the map and explained to Julius II, even if we dig a canal in the shortest distance in the western part of the Sinai Peninsula, the canal will be about 200 kilometers long. Julius II nodded, indicating that he understood. He had spent some time in the East Frisian county, so he naturally knew what a kilometer was. Moreover, Julius II now likes to use kilometers to replace ancient distance calculation units such as leagues in Rome. To dig such a long canal, we have to let large ships pass through. Giuliano, how many years do you think it will take? This. I'm afraid it will take 20 to 30 years. Julius II said uncertainly after thinking for a while. Marin nodded, and Julius II's speculation was not outrageous. In the mid-19th century, when the French presided over the excavation of the Suez Canal, it took a full 11 years. Moreover, in the mid-19th century, many machines were used. The most important of these was the large-scale application of pumps. When digging a canal, it is easy to seep water if it is dug too deep. If it rains heavily, there will be serious water accumulation. Once the river is flooded, it will be impossible to continue digging in the era of manual excavation. The water must be pumped out first. Then, workers can go down to the bottom and continue digging. In the mid-19th century, steam engines and water pumping technology had been greatly developed, and water pumping was naturally fast. Moreover, at that time, relying on colonial plunder and usury, the French spent a huge sum of £18.6 million to dig the Suez Canal. The 19th century was the era of the gold standard, and £1 was equivalent to 7.322 grams of pure gold. £18.6 million is equivalent to 38.255 million ducats. Even though prices were much higher than they are now in the mid-19th century, Venice still needed nearly 10 million ducats to dig such a canal. However, Venice's annual fiscal revenue is only a few hundred thousand ducats. Moreover, its own institutions and military will consume more than half of it. Therefore, the spare money that the Venetian government can take out every year is only a few hundred thousand ducats. It is absolutely a huge pit for Venice to build the Suez Canal, which may cost nearly 10 million ducats. At least, during the construction of the canal, the Venetians will be drained of their savings and will not be able to do anything else for the time being. Moreover, such expenses will last for 20 to 30 years. Therefore, as long as the canal is built, the Venetians will be tied up and unable to do anything else. Moreover, when they learned that Spain and Portugal jointly attacked Arab merchant ships in India, the Venetians had to make such a choice. Because this is the only way out for the Venetians. Otherwise, decline will be inevitable. What makes the Venetians most depressed is that when Spain and Portugal intercepted those Arab merchant ships in the Indian Ocean, the Venetians did not even have an excuse to send troops. Because the Spaniards and Portuguese attacked Arab ships, not Venetian ships, what excuse should the Venetians use to go to war with Spain and Portugal? And when the Spanish and Portuguese fleets cleared the Arab merchant ships, the Venetians would no longer be able to get spices and lose the huge profits of millions of gold coins every year. And this is something the Venetians absolutely cannot tolerate. However, the Venetians did not have the ability to send a fleet to the Indian Ocean to challenge Spain or Portugal. After all, the Venetian ships could not sail to the Indian Ocean. The only exit was the Strait of Gibraltar, which was Spanish territory. If they wanted to go to India via the African coast like Spain and Portugal, they had to ask Spain and Portugal for permission. If nothing was done, the Venetians would completely lose the huge profits of millions of gold coins from the spice trade every year. Even less could they drink a mouthful of soup. And the Republic of Venice would gradually decline, just as it did in history. If the Suez Canal was dug, Venice would still have a chance of survival. After all, Venice had a super naval force of 3,300 galleys, more than Spain and Portugal combined. Even without adopting advanced tactics such as broadside cannons, mainly because the galleys had to paddle on the sides, there was no space to install broadside cannons, it could still defeat the expeditionary fleets of Spain and Portugal with the large number of ships and the cannons at the bow and stern. In the original Battle of Gio in history, because the ships could not be transported to the Red Sea, the Venetians could only provide a few large ships, and let the Egyptians dismantle the ships into wood and send them to the Red Sea for reassembly. This method naturally cannot provide many warships. But if the Suez Canal is opened, the Venetians can send thousands of warships into the Indian Ocean, and they can also pile up the expeditionary fleets of Spain and Portugal by number. Therefore, after Marin provided the idea, the Venetians knew it was a pit, but in order to ensure that the Republic of Venice would not decline, they had to jump in. Because jumping into this pit may be unlucky, but if you don't jump into this pit, you will definitely die. However, in the years of building the canal, Venice must have tightened its belt and lived a difficult life. Because the investment in digging the Suez Canal is too great. During this period of time, Venice will definitely not be able to stir up trouble in Italy, and Julius II can also take advantage of the opportunity that Venice is temporarily unable to take care of him and plan the expansion of the territory. As for Julius II's concern about the prosperity after the opening of the Suez Canal, Marin comforted, Giuliano, you can see the great significance of the Suez Canal to the Venetians, but can the Spaniards not? I am sure that Spain and Portugal will do their best to prevent the Venetians from digging the Suez Canal. In the next 2 or 3 decades, the two sides will be in a deadly battle. Everyone wants to monopolize the huge profits of the spice trade, and no one will give in. By then, Venice will definitely get involved with Spain. Maybe you can use Venice to get the Kingdom of Naples occupied by Spain. The Kingdom of Naples? Julius II was a little confused. Don't you see where the Kingdom of Naples is? It blocks the exit of the Adriatic Sea. When Venice and Spain go to war, they will definitely not be willing to let Spain strangle their throats. At that time, you can completely unite with Venice and try to drive the Spaniards out of the Italian peninsula. It seems to make sense. Julius II said after deep thought. A Suez Canal involves the 3 major powers of Venice, Spain and Portugal, which is also a very powerful strategy. Marin did this to distract the attention of Spain and Portugal. When the 3 major maritime powers were fighting in the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, Marin could quietly engage in colonial development in the Americas. Moreover, this strategy actually took the Ottoman Turkey into account. Why? Venice's construction of the Suez Canal in Egypt was bound to be tied to the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt. When the Ottoman Turkey wanted to annex Egypt in 1517, the Venetians would definitely help the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt desperately. Even if they could not help Egypt defeat Turkey, they would help Egypt defend against the Turkish attack. Moreover, the Venetians would do their best. Otherwise, once the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty, which had a good relationship with Venice, lost, and the Ottoman Turkey, which was hostile to Venice, took charge of Egypt, the Turks would definitely take away the Suez Canal. In that case, Venice would be finished. Venice would be finished. Therefore, Marin's idea would force Venice to do its best to help the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty fight against the Turkish attack. If Turkey did not take Egypt, then it would not be as terrible as it was in history. After all, Egypt is a rich region with developed agriculture and is of great significance. In addition, Marin himself also has his own interests in Egypt. That is, the purchase of natural edible alkali and sodium sulfate. These 2 things are the core raw materials for glassmaking and papermaking, and they are indispensable. Although the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt is also a pagan country, it has frequent trade exchanges with Europe and is an important trading partner of Venice. Turkey and Europe are mortal enemies. Historically, after Turkey occupied Egypt, trade between Egypt and Europe was interrupted. In that case, Marin's glassmaking and papermaking industries will be greatly affected. However, Marin is not willing to send troops to help Egypt fight against Turkey. Because that would be too expensive. Moreover, it would require a long expedition. Therefore, taking advantage of the opportunity of the Venetians to dig the Suez Canal, letting the Venetians be cannon fodder, and helping the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty to withstand the attacks of the Turks is the best choice. As for the prosperity of the Venetians after digging the Suez Canal, what does it have to do with Marin? Anyway, the Venetians are very powerful now, and they don't seem to affect Marin. Well, it may affect the hegemony of the Papal States in Italy. But by then, his father-in-law Julius II would have died long ago. Chapter 373, Entering Venice, Part 1. At least, during your term, the Venetians will keep their tails between their legs. Marin used this sentence to summarize the conversation with Julius II. As for whether the Venetians will become strong and affect the Papal States after they have completed the construction of the Suez Canal, Marin sneered at Julius II's concerns. Does that have anything to do with you? The next pope should be the one who has a headache. Although this was not polite, it was the truth. The Papal States is not hereditary. What does the next pope do to Julius II? Julius II is 61 years old this year, and it would be scary if he could live for 20 years. In this era, there are no reliable doctors in Europe. They are all quacks who bleed and crow. If Julius II wants to live to 80 years old, he has to rely on the power of 2 Mongolian doctors from the Golden Horde provided by Marin. Julius II, who relied on the bloodletting and crowletting of native European doctors, might not live past the age of 70. And 20 years later, even if Venice had completed the construction of the Suez Canal, it was just taking off. In these 20 years, Venice will be fully suppressed by Spain and Portugal in the spice trade, and its national strength will even decline. In the first few years after the opening of the canal, Venice will strive to dominate the Indian Ocean instead of Italy. Anyway, Julius II will never see the scene of Venice showing off its power in Italy. Julius II thought about it and it was right. He was old, and God knew how long he could live. As long as he could achieve greater results during his tenure as pope, he would be remembered in history. As for the successor pope, let him die. That's not right, my second grandson Robert, don't you want him to be pope? Are you digging a hole for your son? Julius II said to Marin speechlessly. Who cares? I can only take care of the present. Besides, no matter how powerful Venice is, it dare not attack Rome. At most, it will seize Rimini and other places that did not originally belong to the Holy See, and dominate the Adriatic Sea region, but it will not attack Rome. Unless it wants to be beaten up by the whole of Europe. Marin shrugged, and he didn't have any idea about his second son's affairs. In his opinion, whether Robert can become pope is still an unknown. Therefore, it is most worthwhile to seize the present and focus the attention of Spain and Portugal on the Venetians. As for Venice becoming stronger after Robert becomes pope, that's not a problem. Because, that will be a matter of decades later. By then, Marin will have completed the development of America and will be stronger than Venice. At worst, send troops to teach Venice a lesson. For a maritime hegemon like Venice, the history that Marin read in his previous life gave a solution to deal with it. The Dutch declined after their homeland was captured by the French army. And Venice. Damn, it was also destroyed by the French. It seems that the French are killers of small commercial countries. After pacifying his father-in-law, Marin led a large group of bodyguards and marched towards Venice in high spirits. Holding the letter of introduction from the Pope, Marin was full of confidence and walked with his nose up all the way. In Italy, everyone recognizes the Pope's letter of introduction. In this way, Marin came to Venice with a swagger and entered the Doge's palace of the Republic of Venice, which was also very famous in later generations. Leonardo Loredan, the current governor of the Republic of Venice, can be regarded as an old friend of Marin. At the beginning, when Marin and the Republic of Venice traded French prisoners of war horses and armor, Leonardo Loredan was the deputy of Agostino Barbarigo, the then governor of Venice. He had dealt with Marin several times and was considered an acquaintance. Welcome, Marin. Duke. I never thought that after 10 years, the daring knight back then would become a powerful duke. Leonardo Loredan looked at Marin, who was full of vigor and surrounded by guards, with a very complicated look. Leonardo, you were also the adjutant of Governor Barbarigo back then. Now, aren't you promoted? Marin had to look up to Leonardo Loredan back then. But now, he is a powerful duke with tens of thousands of soldiers and horses, and can have an equal dialogue with Leonardo Loredan. After entering the reception room, Leonardo Loredan looked at Marin with interest and said, Why? Duke Marin, are you here to be a lobbyist for His Holiness the Pope? Out of confidence in the strength of Venice, the Venetians do not look down on the weak papal states, nor do they respect the Pope that much. If it weren't for the strong influence of the Holy See, the Venetians would want to annex Rome. No, I'm here to save Venice. Marin said seriously. This is the ultimate skill of the ancient Chinese strategists and lobbyists. They are obviously here to fool people, but when they open their mouths, they say they want to save the other party. Save Venice? Leonardo Loredan laughed. Venice is extremely powerful, and the country is thriving. I'm afraid it doesn't need you, Duke Marin, to save it. Leonardo, you are too arrogant. Or rather, Venice is too arrogant. Don't you feel the coming of the crisis? Crisis? I would like to hear more about it. Leonardo Loredan didn't care much, but he still planned to see what Marin said. I know that you Venetians look down on the strength of the papal states. But, Leonardo, have you ever thought about this? Is the strength of the Holy See really as simple as it seems on the surface? Leonardo Loredan frowned, thought for a while, and said, You mean, the Holy See will call on other countries to oppose Venice? You are right, the Pope is planning to do so. Duke Marin, don't bluff me. It is true that the Holy See has appeal, but Venice has not sent troops to attack the Holy See's original territory. It only helped the Malatesta family to regain the fiefdom snatched away by Caesar Borgia. Could this also give the Holy See an excuse to conquer Venice? The Venetians believed that the Holy See had no reason to organize multiple countries to attack Venice, so they dared to occupy the Rimini area with confidence. What is the Malatesta family? Who doesn't know that Pandolfo of the Malatesta family is just a puppet of the Venetians? Moreover, the Venetians have ignored the current European situation. European situation? How do you say that? Currently, there are several major powers in Europe, including France, the Holy Roman Empire, Spain and Britain. May I ask, which one is Venice on good terms with? None. Leonardo Loredan said awkwardly. In fact, most of the French power has been squeezed out of Italy and is seeking to return to Italy. In order to gain more shares of the Indian spice trade, the Spaniards are natural competitors of the Venetians. His Majesty Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, is my monarch. His Austria is close to Venice. And the Austrians have been coveting Venice's wealth for a long time. Well. As for Britain, it seems that it has nothing in common with Venice. Leonardo Loredan thought about it, and what Marin said was not wrong at all. From this point of view, Venice really has no powerful allies, but there are many powers coveting them. You mean to say that the great powers will respond to the call of the Holy See and join forces to fight Venice? Leonardo Loredan was a little bit unbelievable. Of course, Venice is so rich, who wouldn't covet your wealth? For those big countries, why not respond to the call of the Holy See so openly, send troops to Venice, and rob Venice's wealth? So, it doesn't matter whether the Holy See has a suitable reason. What's important is whether those big countries are willing to send troops to Venice. Leonardo Loredan rolled his eyes immediately. How could they not be willing? Venice is so rich, and this time it was many countries attacking Venice, whoever sent troops would benefit. After all, robbing in Venice and robbing in the Swiss mountains are two different things. Although the annual fiscal revenue of Venice's official government is only a few million ducats, but the merchants in Venice make more profits. Venice is a country of merchants, and the interests of merchants are the first. Compared with the annual income of a few million gold coins from the treasury, the total annual income of merchants is definitely more than 10 million gold coins per year. Any army from any country, if they had the chance to break into Venice, the Republic of Venice, and rob property worth 1 million gold coins, it would be easy. Even if they robbed property worth several million gold coins, it would not be surprising. Few people or countries could bear such a huge temptation. Therefore, Leonardo Loredan, the Doge of Venice, also began to realize the seriousness of the problem. Chapter 374, Entering Venice, Part 2. As the governor of a powerful country, Leonardo Loredan is not just a figurehead. After realizing the seriousness of the problem, he immediately sent people to invite more than a dozen bigwigs with decision-making power in the Republic of Venice to the governor's palace. These dozen bigwigs are just councillors on the surface, but in fact, they are the heads of the families behind the largest dozen chambers of commerce in Venice. Like the Barbarigo family where the previous governor was, the Loredan family where the current governor Leonardo Loredan was, as well as the Mocenigo family and the Grimani family, are all the heads of the tycoons who control Venice and are also the small group of people who decide the fate of Venice. Although Leonardo Loredan is the governor of the Republic of Venice and has the power to decide on general matters. However, major events involving the life and death of the Republic of Venice must be discussed and decided by the leaders of more than a dozen tycoons. In the afternoon, more than a dozen tycoon leaders gathered in the conference hall of the governor's palace to discuss the future of Venice. However, some of them were full of doubts about Marin's words. So, Councillor Alani of the Trone family, which mainly deals in the spice trade, spoke. Everyone, Mr. Marin is now the special envoy of the Pope. So, what he says may not be credible. After all, he wants Rimini back for the Pope. So, there is water in his words. Alani spoke in standard Latin in Europe at that time. At this time, English was only the language of small border countries, and Latin was the common language in Europe. Marin smiled slightly and did not take Councillor Alani's words to heart. Moreover, he really had a clear conscience this time. Because he didn't lie. So, Marin smiled and said, Mr. Alani, although I was sent by the Pope to make peace. But, what I said is not false at all. You are all people who have been struggling in the political arena for many years. If I lie, can you still tell it by inference? Take my monarch Maximilian I for example. Even if Rome has no reason to call on everyone to besiege Venice, as long as the Pope uses the coronation of the Emperor as a bargaining chip, do you think Austria will send troops to attack Venice's flank? Marin said confidently. This. Many members hesitated immediately. Everyone present knew that Maximilian I had wanted to ascend the throne for a long time. Otherwise, he would not have spent money to ask the Paleologos family to buy the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire. However, after purchasing the Eastern Roman throne of the Paleologos family, there were very few countries that recognized it. Because Maximilian I did not occupy Constantinople, most countries believed that Maximilian I's Eastern Roman throne was in name only. Most importantly, the attitude of the Holy See was rather ambiguous, and it had not made a statement, neither recognizing the legitimacy of Maximilian I's Eastern Roman Emperor nor denying it. In fact, the Holy See was just waiting for Maximilian I to express his opinion. This expression was not for money, but for Maximilian I's real support for the Papal States. Therefore, whether it was recognizing Maximilian I's identity as the Eastern Roman Emperor or holding a coronation ceremony for Maximilian I's identity as the Holy Roman Emperor, it could be exchanged for Maximilian I's troops. Therefore, many of the members present changed their faces. However, Alani said unconvincedly, even if Maximilian I's Austria was willing to send troops, what would happen? Venice is much richer than that poor emperor, and can hire more troops to repel their attack. Alani's words were agreed by many Venetian members. But Marin said, Mr. Alani, please don't forget that the Holy See still has tens of thousands of troops in Rome. So what? Venice has more troops. But what if both sides attack together? Venice must do its best to stop the offensive of His Majesty Maximilian I. At this time, it will be effortless for the Roman army to take over the Rimini area. More than a dozen Venetian bosses were silent. Indeed, if Venice only needed to fight against one of the two, it would not be afraid. However, if both sides attacked together, there would be a problem. The Rimini area is not close to the mainland of Venice, and there is the Duchy of Ferrara between it and the mainland of Venice. Although Alani despised the financial problems of Maximilian I's Austria. But it is undeniable that the combat effectiveness of the Austrian army is much stronger than that of the Italian mercenaries. Even in the German region, except for the Swiss mercenaries, the combat effectiveness of the Austrian army is also ranked at the forefront. Therefore, once the Austrians launch an attack, Venice must go all out to defeat the Austrian attack. At this time, if Rome also sent tens of thousands of troops to attack the Rimini area, the Venetians would be unable to rescue. Otherwise, if they rescued the Rimini area, the homeland would be unsafe. Which is more important, the safety of the homeland or the safety of the Rimini area? Anyone who is not a fool knows what to choose. We can hire another 10,000 people to prepare for war. Alani said unwillingly. Sir Alani, please note that the Holy See can call on not only Austria, but also France. France. When the name of France was mentioned, everyone's face changed immediately. After all, the magic demon is the strongest existence on the European continent at this time. What reason do the French have to attack Venice? Asked Senator Amero of the Celsi family. Venice is very rich, everyone knows it, right? Marin said slowly. The Venetian councillors present first smiled, then their faces changed. If we attack Venice and win, we will surely be able to rob a huge amount of wealth. If we capture Venice, it will be no problem to rob wealth worth tens of millions of ducats. I think the French will be happy to send troops together when they know that Austria is also sending troops. After all, if France and Austria join forces, Venice will only be defeated. At that time, the French will get at least millions of gold coins in return. Moreover, the excuse for sending troops is provided by the most prestigious church in Europe. Why should the French refuse? Now, none of the Venetian councillors present spoke. Obviously, they also knew the interests involved. Even if Venice did not offend France, too much money was the fault of the Venetians. If it were the Chinese, they would definitely say, a man is innocent but guilty of possessing a treasure. Although the Venetians did not know this sentence, they understood the same truth. Venice is rich, and European countries have long been jealous. However, Venice is very strong, and a single country is not sure of winning against Venice. Moreover, there is no reason to attack Venice. However, with the call of the Holy See, it will be different. At that time, attacking Venice is equivalent to wearing a cloak of justice. After attacking Venice, looting is the routine of the army in this era. Especially, when the Holy Roman Empire is bound to send troops, other countries will easily see the opportunity. The Austrian army alone can attract most of Venice's forces. At this time, if another powerful army appears, Venice will be doomed. Whether it is France or Spain. As long as one of these two powers stands up to take advantage of the fire and joins the Austrian army to attack Venice, Venice will be finished. If Venice was captured, it goes without saying that the wealth of the families of the dozen or so Venetian bosses present would be plundered by the invading enemy. At that time, they would even have trouble surviving, let alone living a carefree life. Therefore, the atmosphere in the conference room suddenly froze. The bosses lowered their heads and began to think, comparing the gains and losses in their hearts. Chapter 375, Heavy Bomb. After a while, Senator Maigret suddenly raised his head and said, "Is it possible to bribe Maximilian I with money and let him give up attacking Venice? Everyone knows that Maximilian I is the most short of money." The eyes of the people present suddenly lit up. Yes, Venice is the most rich, and spending money to bribe is also their forte. But Marin shook his head firmly and said, "This is impossible, Lord Maigret, do you know? Maximilian I attaches great importance to the throne. As long as the Pope helps him to be crowned, he will be the only legitimate emperor in Europe. There is always a price that can make Maximilian I give in. Maigret argued. Marin thought about it and decided to reveal a bombshell. You are right, that is under normal circumstances. But this time, no matter how much money Venice gives, it may be useless. Why? Maigret didn't believe it. Well, I'm going to tell you a secret here, and I hope you can keep it secret. Otherwise, the Pope will not forgive me. After seeing the people present nod, Marin said, I stayed in the Holy See for a while and learned a huge secret. Do you know? In order to ask Austria to send troops to attack Venice, His Majesty Julius II planned to come up with a condition that Maximilian I absolutely could not refuse, as a bargaining chip for Austria to attack Venice with all its strength. What kind of bargaining chip can make Austria attack Venice with all its strength? Leonardo Loredan asked curiously. In addition to crowning His Majesty Maximilian I, it is good to authorize the Holy Roman Empire. From now on, the emperor's coronation does not need to come to Rome, and the Archbishop of Mainz can be crowned in the country. Marin slowly said, this killer of Julius II. In fact, this has not happened yet. In the original history, when the Cambrai Alliance was formed, in exchange for the full cooperation of Maximilian I, Julius II gave this condition. As a result, Maximilian I stood on the side of Julius II without hesitation and sent troops to attack Venice. Is His Holiness crazy? Giving up the right to coronation is equivalent to lifting the ban on the Holy Roman Empire. In the future, can the Holy Roman Empire still take the Holy See seriously? You know, the right to coronate the emperor has always been an important means for the Holy See to check and balance the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Leonardo Loredan exclaimed. That's right, Governor. Although doing so will untie the shackles on the Holy Roman Empire. However, the current situation in Europe is different. After the French became strong, the Holy Roman Empire is no longer the hegemon of Europe. Even if the Holy Roman Empire wants to seize Italy, it has to ask the French whether they agree or not. Marin's explanation is very reasonable. Since the rise of France, the Holy Roman Empire is no longer the hegemon of the European continent. Moreover, the French pose a greater threat to Italy. Julius II lifted the ban on the Holy Roman Empire just to let the Holy Roman Empire and the French fight each other. However, Julius II did not expect that the Holy Roman Empire and Spain would merge. Then, with the support of Spanish-American gold and silver, the Holy Roman Empire beat France for decades, captured the French king alive, and then put the Holy See under the protection of Spain. After Marin said this secret that Julius II had not yet made a decision, the dozen or so Venetian bosses present were shocked. It can be said that if the Pope not only promised to crown Maximilian I, but also allowed him not to come to the Holy See for coronation in the future, it is conceivable how desperate Maximilian I would be. Because the future emperor of the Holy Roman Empire will no longer be restricted by the Holy See. Just for this, it is worth it for the Habsburg family to fight for the Holy See, and they are willing to fight for their lives. The meeting room was silent for a long time, and the Venetian bosses were a little depressed. At this time, General Marino, who was in charge of the military affairs of Venice, suddenly said, "What if we go to Switzerland to hire a large number of Swiss mercenaries? Can we stop the enemy's attack?" "Yes, that's a good idea." Senator Alani immediately became excited and supported Marino's suggestion. "I'm afraid not." Niccolò Pirauno, the second in command of the military of the Republic of Venice who emerged in the Battle of Fornovo, shook his head. Why not? As the military boss, Marino was very dissatisfied with the second-in-command's behavior of undermining him. Don't forget, the biggest employer of Swiss mercenaries is the French. If the French interfere, we won't be able to hire enough Swiss mercenaries. Moreover, I sent people to Switzerland some time ago to hire a group of mercenaries. However, I was told that Switzerland was hired by a mysterious big employer last year, 20,000 people. Now, there are probably not many mercenaries in Switzerland. The rest need to stay to guard against Maximilian I's attack on Switzerland from the direction of Graubünden. Niccolò broke out a bombshell, which made Marin a little stunned. What? Someone hired 20,000 people from Switzerland? Is this certain? Marin asked in surprise. Marin keenly felt that something big was going to happen. 20,000 Swiss mercenaries were hired, and they were definitely not taken away for fun. There must be a war about to break out. And Marin was unaware of this, which made him feel bad. So, Marin decided to send someone to Switzerland to investigate the matter immediately after the negotiation. It's certain. Niccolò nodded. Marin didn't know that the information provided by Niccolò would save his life in the future. Marin didn't want to continue to beat around the bush with these Venetian bosses at this time. So, he stood up very solemnly and said, Venice is really in danger. I am not trying to scare you. Here, I intend to tell you a big secret that concerns the life and death of Venice. But first, please swear on the Bible that you must not tell others that I leaked this news. Seeing that Marin was so mysterious, Alani said dissatisfiedly, what secret is so important? We have to swear so solemnly. Isn't it too much of a fuss? If you don't like it, I don't say it. Anyway, it's Venice that is unlucky, not Marin. Marin said coldly. He didn't want to leak the secret afterwards. If the Spaniards knew about it, they would definitely hate him. Leonardo Loredan saw that Marin didn't look like he was lying, so he persuaded others to accept Marin's opinion. More than a dozen bosses swore solemnly on the Bible. Now, can you tell me? Alani said dissatisfiedly. It's like this. When I was participating in the negotiations between Spain and Portugal on the revision of the Treaty of Tordesillas at the Vatican, I heard a shocking secret. What is it? Tell me. Spain and Portugal intend to reconcile, form a joint fleet, control the Arabian Sea west of India, and intercept all Arab and Egyptian merchant ships selling spices. After Marin finished speaking, he leisurely drank a sip of water. At first, the Venetian bosses present hadn't reacted. But soon, everyone's face changed drastically. This is going to push Venice to a dead end. Marco Barbarigo, the representative of the Barbarigo family and the nephew of the former governor of Venice, Agostino Barbarigo, immediately lost his composure. You know, the spice trade is an important business of the Barbarigo family and the main source of profit. If the Arab and Egyptian merchant ships are intercepted by the Spanish and Portuguese, the Venetian merchants will no longer have spices to resell. At that time, the Venetian business will be greatly affected. It's really a confidential news that concerns the life and death of Venice. Duke Marin, can you guarantee that what you said is the truth? Leonardo Loredan asked seriously after sighing. I can swear to God on the Bible that what I said is true. But at the same time, please don't reveal that I said it. Otherwise, Spain and Portugal will find trouble with me. So, I asked you to swear just now. Marin answered seriously. Leonardo Loredan nodded, knowing that this matter was of great importance, and it was very reasonable for Marin to do so. However, this news was too important. If it was not handled properly, Venice would really decline. After all, the families of the dozen or so big men present were basically involved in the spice trade. Although some had more or less, everyone basically had a share. If the source of spices was cut off by Spain and Portugal, the blow to Venice would be enormous. What should we do? What should we do? At this time, Senator Alani, who had been very arrogant just now, murmured in a somewhat lost state. In fact, not only Alani, but other Venetian big men were also stunned by the bombshell thrown by Marin. Chapter 376, Entering Venice, Part 2. After waiting for a long time, seeing that the time was almost right, Marin cleared his throat and said, in fact, it's not that there is no way. Sure enough, more than a dozen big men immediately raised their heads and said, tell me quickly, if it works, Venice will accept your favor. Alani said excitedly, and grabbed Marin's hand. Marin shook off Alani's hand calmly, took out a map from his arms, spread it out, and motioned everyone to come and see, please look, this is India, this is the Arabian Sea. These Venetian big men were basically seeing such an accurate map for the first time, and were a little surprised. Marin didn't have time to popularize geographical knowledge to them, but continued, please look, this is the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. The narrowest place in the western region here, the Mediterranean Sea, is only 39.36 leagues, 190 kilometers, away from the Red Sea connecting to the Indian Ocean. What if the Venetians dig a canal here, so that more than 3,000 Venetian ships can sail freely between the Mediterranean and the Arabian Sea? You mean, dig a canal connecting the Mediterranean and the Red Sea? Leonardo Loredan asked. Of course, once this canal is dug, Venice's ships will be able to travel freely between India and Europe. Even if Spain and Portugal form a joint fleet, so what? The Spanish and Portuguese can only send dozens of warships to India. As long as this canal is dug, Venice can easily send hundreds of warships there. Why should it be afraid of Spain and Portugal? As for whether they will challenge Venice in the Mediterranean and seize the canal, that is even more impossible. The ships of Spain and Portugal are pure sailing ships without oars. In the Mediterranean with weak wind, they can't compete with Venice's paddle boats at all. At this point, the Venetian bosses present nodded and agreed with Marin's words. Moreover, this is also true. In this era, pure sailing ships cannot control the hegemony of the Mediterranean. In the early 19th century, when Britain and France were competing for hegemony in the Mediterranean, they encountered the embarrassing incident of the wind stopping. At that time, the warships of Britain and France were all driven by pure sails. When the wind stopped, the warships of Britain and France were forced to stop fighting for 10 minutes and wait for the wind to pick up again before continuing the war. By the mid to late 19th century, when the Suez Canal was actually dug, British warships were basically powered by a combination of steam engines and sails, which were the legendary motor sailing ships. When there was no wind in the Mediterranean, the steam engine was used for driving. When it came to the ocean, if the wind was strong, the steam engine was shut down to save coal and sails were used for power. Moreover, there was another very important problem, that is, when a ship passed through the canal, the sailboat could not make a Z movement and use the wind from the headwind or other directions. Because that requires a very wide river surface to support it. But digging a canal is so difficult that it is impossible to dig a canal that is too wide. Therefore, if a sailing warship wants to cross the canal, it must either take advantage of the favorable wind or find trackers on the shore to help pull it, just like Emperor Yang of Sui's dragon boat. Of course, Venice's paddle boats do not have this concern. When crossing the canal, lower the sails and just paddle to ensure that the route is straight and does not require a very wide river surface. Later steam-powered ships or motor sailing ships were no problem. A 190-kilometer canal could be driven by steam engines. But this land belongs to the Egyptians. Will the Egyptians agree if we dig a canal there? Leonardo Loredan asked doubtfully. Of course they won't agree now, but soon, the Spanish and Portuguese joint fleet will intercept all Egyptian merchant ships. And the Egyptians will definitely not agree and will send ships to fight the Venetians. But how can the backward Egyptian navy be a match for the combined forces of Spain and Portugal? When the Egyptians are defeated, their interests will be greatly damaged. At that time, they can only rely on Venice to defeat the Spanish and Portuguese. By then, they will definitely agree to the Venetians digging a canal in the Sinai Peninsula. Marin said confidently. That's true, but it will take many years to dig a canal. During the canal digging period. Leonardo Loredan said worriedly. Marin knew what he was worried about, but it was useless to worry, so he said, Governor, I know what you are worried about. But it is useless to worry. With the Spanish and Portuguese joining forces, even the Venetian navy will have some difficulty. Those Indians and Egyptians are impossible to win. Therefore, in the years before the opening of the canal, Venice may not get spices anymore. Only by opening the canal can the Venetians regain all the lost benefits and drive away the Spaniards and Portuguese. Everyone looked at the map and nodded, agreeing with Marin's words. After all, the Venetians have dominated the Mediterranean for a long time. Moreover, the two colonies of Crete and Cyprus are very close to Egypt. As long as the canal is opened, the Venetians can dispatch hundreds or thousands of warships to drive away the Spanish and Portuguese ships. It is very troublesome for Spain and Portugal to send ships to India to bypass the entire Africa, and there are not many ships that can be sent. With the numerical advantage of the Venetians, they will be unstoppable. How about we attack Spain directly in the Mediterranean? In this way, we can force the Spanish not to attack our spice ships. General Marino suddenly said. What are we attacking Spain for? For those Arabs and Egyptians? They are pagans. If we attack Christians for pagans, aren't you afraid of being surrounded and beaten by the whole of Europe? Marin retorted. Everyone was speechless. Yes, Spain and Portugal intercepted pagan merchant ships, not Venetian merchant ships. How could Venice have a reason to declare war on Spain? So, they had to swallow this loss. Or, we can dismantle the ship and transport it to the Red Sea to support the Egyptian fleet and fight against Spain and Portugal. Niccolò Pirluino suggested. This suggestion made everyone's eyes light up. This method is too stupid. How many ships can you dismantle and send over? A dozen at most. And it will take several months to reassemble one ship in the Red Sea. And there are so many ships in Spain and Portugal, it is simply too late to do this. So, the most fundamental way is to dig this canal so that Venice's merchant ships can travel freely between India and Europe. At that time, the whole of India can belong to Venice. Marin said temptingly. Everyone present suddenly breathed quickly. They all knew how rich India was. If the canal was opened, Spain and Portugal were defeated, and India's interests were monopolized, how much wealth would it be? But before that, Leonardo Loredan said calmly. There is no way. Before the canal is opened, Venice can only endure. Do you mean that Venice needs to shrink strategically? Yes, during the construction of the canal, Venice had better not provoke strong enemies, but focus on development first. When the canal is opened, Venice will take back everything it has lost. You mean, do you want us to bow to the Holy See this time and give up the Rimini area? General Marino asked with dissatisfaction. As a military representative, he hated to yield and surrender the most. Venice can also choose not to give in, and then wait to be beaten up by several powerful countries, and then the wealth of everyone present will be robbed and become beggars. If we hold on to the city, we may not lose. Niccolò said unconvinced. Yes, maybe Venice will not lose. But you will be deeply trapped in the land hegemony with several major powers and cannot extricate yourself. At the same time, the fleets of Spain and Portugal will quietly enter the Indian waters, cutting off the source of spices for everyone, and causing a heavy blow to the Venetian economy. With the joint attack of several major powers and the termination of the maritime spice trade, how many years can Venice last? Marin's words, like a sledgehammer, hit the hearts of the Venetian bosses heavily. If Venice fights the Holy See to death for that little piece of land in Rimini and really attracts a beating from several major powers, it is very likely that Venice will be finished. Even if Venice had not been defeated, it would have been inevitable that it would have declined if it had not been able to stop Spain and Portugal from cutting off the source of Indian spices. After all, the spice trade accounted for the bulk of Venice's business. Without the spice trade, Venice's economy would have suffered a heavy blow and would no longer be as glorious as it is now. Moreover, if you surrender to the Pope at this time, you can also take the opportunity to form an alliance with the Holy See and jointly deal with the Spaniards. Deal with the Spaniards? Leonardo Loredang was a little puzzled. Yes, the Pope actually has a lot of ideas about the Kingdom of Naples. It's a pity that the Papal States is limited in strength and is not enough to compete with the Spanish or the French. But this is Venice's opportunity. You can completely use your alliance with the Pope to find a suitable excuse to retaliate against Spain for robbing you of your spice trade interests. For example, join the Holy See to rob the Kingdom of Naples. After all, the Kingdom of Naples is blocking the outlet of the Adriatic Sea, which has a great impact on Venice. Marin's proposal was agreed by Leonardo Loredang and others. If Spain robs Venice's interests, Venice will not be easy to mess with. They may not be able to beat Spain on land, but they can beat Spain hard at sea, especially in the Mediterranean. The Venetians did not give an immediate answer. Next, they summoned more bigwigs and started a heated discussion. After 3 consecutive days and nights of meetings, a group of exhausted Venetian bigwigs finally decided to surrender to the Papal States. At the same time, the Venetian parliament decided to send people to Egypt immediately to discuss the construction of the Suez Canal, the name proposed by Marin, which is a restoration of history, and sent experts to start exploring the route of the canal to prepare early. After all, for Venice, the sooner the Suez Canal is completed and the Spice Channel is controlled, the more initiative it can take. As for the past few years, Venice intends to keep a low profile and avoid conflicts with others. Of course, for Spain, if it is really confirmed that they participated in the interception of spice ships in the Indian waters, the Venetians will join the Holy See to find fault with the Spanish. Not to mention being able to seize the Kingdom of Naples or Sicily under Spanish control, but on the ocean, intercepting Spanish ships and causing heavy losses to Spain would be no problem. In this way, the extremely powerful Republic of Venice jumped into the pit that Marin had dug for them. And it was willing. After all, if the Suez Canal was really dug, Venice might really defeat Spain and Portugal and take the interests of India alone. However, after digging the canal for such a long time, could the Venetians really complete the digging of the canal safely? Chapter 377, The Death of Isabella I. Regardless of the fate of the Venetians, Marin's mission was finally completed very beautifully. Of course, out of kindness, Marin reminded the Venetians that paddle boats were at a disadvantage compared to sailing warships in naval battles. Because the paddle boats had fewer cannons than others. Therefore, Marin suggested that Venice should increase the gun positions as much as possible to improve its combat effectiveness without affecting the sailing performance of the paddle boats. In this regard, Leonardo Loredang, the governor of Venice, adopted Marin's suggestion in order to try to study the manufacture of paddle boats that could deploy more cannons. In fact, Marin's Emden shipyard had long studied the tactics of increasing cannons on paddle boats. Moreover, a final conclusion was reached: the best layout method for the cannons and oars not to affect each other is to build a double-deck paddle boat. The rowers paddled through the windows on the lower deck, while the cannons were deployed on the top deck. In this way, the oars that the rowers paddled back and forth would not affect the cannons above. In this way, the paddle boats can deploy 20 or 30 cannons. Of course, it has to be a large double-deck paddle boat. Moreover, in order to reduce the recoil torque and avoid the hull from shaking too much, the top deck is preferably equipped with small and medium-sized artillery, and heavy artillery should be avoided as much as possible. Because when heavy artillery is fired, the recoil is very strong. Generally speaking, in order to ensure stable navigation, the center of gravity of the ship is generally low to avoid sailing. The recoil arm of the top deck artillery is much longer than that of the lower deck. Then, when the artillery on the top deck is fired, the torque generated by the recoil is much greater than that of the artillery of the same power on the lower deck. If too many heavy artillery are installed on the top deck, the recoil torque generated during the salvo is enough to overturn the ship. Therefore, on warships in the 19th century, many heavy artillery were arranged on the lower deck. For example, when the American Matthew Perry led the fleet to deter Edo, Japan, the 68-pound Pexon gun equipped on the ship was placed on the lower deck. Of course, this is also to protect the shrapnel shells from being detonated by the sparks of enemy shells. After all, if you pile shrapnel on the top deck, it is easy for the enemy's artillery to blow up the entire ship. But it is undeniable that if you put heavy artillery on the lower deck, the recoil torque will be much smaller. If you only place artillery on the top deck, you can't arrange too many heavy artillery. Otherwise, the ship will really capsize when firing a salvo. However, in this era, the specifications of artillery used by everyone generally do not exceed 20 pounds. Therefore, this problem is not a problem. The Venetians casually arranged some artillery of more than 10 pounds on the top deck, which was enough to fight a naval battle with the Spanish and Portuguese. Marin didn't say too much in detail because it involved some military secrets. For example, in order to be more resistant to artillery fire, Marin ordered the ribs of the warship to be made very dense, the thickness of the side planks was thickened, and he planned to cover them with iron sheets. In this way, more than 10 pounds of artillery can't threaten Marin's warships at all, and more than 20 pounds of artillery can't. Only larger caliber artillery can threaten warships with dense ribs, thickened side planks and iron sheets. Obviously, Marin would not tell the Venetians such secrets. After all, the world has not yet entered the era of naval warfare, and people do not pay much attention to the thickening of the side. Therefore, Marin did not reveal the core secrets of his own warships to Venice, but only told Venice a very simple way to increase the number of artillery: build a larger ship, make 2 decks, open windows on the lower deck for rowers to row, and arrange more artillery on the upper deck without the interference of oars for naval warfare. In fact, after the Venetians got this inspiration, their naval strength has been greatly enhanced. At least, it is not a problem to beat Spain in the Mediterranean. Anyway, some Spain will be unlucky in the future. If the Venetians begin to threaten Spain's shipping routes in the Mediterranean, Spain will definitely be scratching its head. And the key to the problem is that Spain must communicate with the 2 places through ships if it wants to rule the isolated kingdom of Naples and Sicily. If the transportation line was cut off by the Venetians, Spain's rule over the 2 places would also be in big trouble. Marin gave the Venetians this idea to cater to his father-in-law Julius II's ambition to unify Italy. At least, it can greatly increase the probability of the Papal State obtaining the Kingdom of Naples. Sure enough, after returning to Rome, Julius II greatly praised Marin's contribution. Of course, there is no mention of any reward between the father-in-law and the son-in-law. After all, Julius II did not have as much money as Marin. And Marin secretly gave Venice ideas, so that they could strike at Spain's hegemony in the Mediterranean, which also won high praise from Julius II. In the eyes of Julius II, it was unreasonable for Spain to occupy the Kingdom of Naples. It was reasonable to hand over the Kingdom of Naples to the Holy See for management. What Julius II and Marin, the father-in-law and son-in-law, did not know was that a big thing happened in Spain at this time. Isabella I died. As for the reason, you have to ask Marin. At the beginning, in order to destroy the marriage alliance between Spain and Britain, Marin deliberately leaked the news to the French under the guidance of Julius II. As a result, the French really took it seriously. Moreover, the French regarded the information that Ferdinand II was looking for women everywhere in Italy, deliberately revealed by Marin, as a top priority. The French have their own power in Spain. Even many Spanish nobles have secretly turned to France, secretly communicated with France, and quietly helped the French. Among them, the nobles in the border area between northern Spain and France are the worst. After all, they don't know whether their territory will be annexed by France one day. Louis XII actually knew that Isabella I was ill. After all, French spies in Spain were not vegetarians. After hearing about Ferdinand II's romantic affairs in Italy, the wretched Louis XII summoned French court painters, took out the portraits of Ferdinand II drawn by the spies in his collection as references, and asked the court painters to draw more than a dozen portraits of Ferdinand II and several naked women in a group. Then, Louis XII sent spies to send these dozen paintings to Spain, and let the French spies in Spain send them to the Spanish palace through secret channels. Originally, Isabella I was in poor health. But as long as she relaxed and waited until spring came, she would be able to recover. However, these dozen restricted oil paintings about Isabella I's husband Ferdinand II's love in Italy instantly made Isabella I feel extremely bad. At the same time, under the impetus of the French, news about Ferdinand II dating his lover in Italy and Princess Catherine being imprisoned and tortured in the Tower of London by Henry VII spread rapidly throughout Spain. Isabella I was already in a bad mood when she saw the dozen restricted oil paintings. When she heard that her youngest daughter, Princess Catherine, was imprisoned and tortured by King Henry VII of England, Isabella I was in a very bad mood, or angry to the extreme. At this time, her body was already very weak. Under such a great stimulation, Isabella I fell ill again. This time, ginger and brown sugar water failed to save the queen. 53-year-old Isabella I finally couldn't make it and passed away. When the queen died, Ferdinand II was having an extremely erotic, uncovered meeting with several young and beautiful Italian girls in the royal palace of Naples. Chapter 378 A New Era. In the Roman Lateran Temple, the next day after Marin came back, he suddenly remembered that the Venetian general Niccolò said that 20,000 Swiss mercenaries were hired by a mysterious employer. This matter is quite mysterious, because Niccolò's people did not find out who hired the 20,000 Swiss mercenaries. You know, if the French hired Swiss mercenaries, there is no need to keep it secret. Because the cooperation between the French and Switzerland is an old relationship, there is no need to hide it from others. Therefore, these 20,000 Swiss mercenaries must have been hired by other countries. But why keep it secret? It can be seen that the employer is planning a shocking action. You know, 20,000 Swiss mercenaries can fight a war to destroy the country. Could it be the Duchy of Guedes? Marin suddenly remembered the Duchy of Guedes, which was fighting against the Saxon coalition. However, Marin soon rejected this idea himself. Why? Because the Duchy of Guedes did not need to hire 20,000 Swiss mercenaries at all. The Principality of Gedici has tens of thousands of troops, plus it has already hired thousands of Swiss mercenaries. It doesn't need to hire another 20,000 people to easily defeat the Saxon coalition. Besides, the cost of Swiss mercenaries is not cheap, 3 times that of ordinary mercenaries. The daily salary of ordinary mercenaries is 3 pfennigs, while that of Swiss mercenaries is 9 pfennigs. Hiring 20,000 Swiss mercenaries will cost 180,000 pfennigs a day, which is 3,000 gold coins. In a month, it will cost 90,000 gold coins. After fighting for a few months, the cost will reach hundreds of thousands of gold coins. Although the Principality of Gedici is relatively wealthy, it has an army of tens of thousands of people to support, and it does not have the financial resources to hire another 20,000 Swiss mercenaries. So, Marin was a little confused. But soon, he decided to quickly send spies to Switzerland to get information. It happened that the first batch of students from the spy school had already left the mountain, and a few people could be sent to Switzerland to get information. If they couldn't find out, they could kidnap powerful people and use torture to extract confessions. To this end, Marin wrote a letter to Schwartz, asking him to mobilize the special forces led by Cage to cooperate with Kohler's spies to go to Switzerland to inquire about the news. Kohler's spies are mainly responsible for inquiring about the news, while Cage's special forces are responsible for kidnapping Swiss dignitaries who know the news, and can even torture them to obtain intelligence. A few days later, news came from Spain: Isabella I died. The news was sent back by the spies arranged by the Holy See in Spain by land, through France, and galloping back. As one of the great powers in Europe, it is normal for Julius II to pay attention to the news from Spain. In particular, Julius II's enemy, Caesar Borgia, is still living safely in Spain at this time. Therefore, the Holy See and the Rovere family have spies arranged in Spain. After learning that Isabella I had passed away, Marin first sighed, and then breathed a sigh of relief. Isabella I can be said to be one of the most outstanding queens in European history, even more outstanding than Queen Elizabeth I of England. Although Elizabeth I's personal ability to govern is stronger. However, Elizabeth I's vision is not as long-term as Isabella I. Moreover, Elizabeth I's influence on later generations is far less than Isabella I. You know, when Isabella I funded Columbus's voyage, she almost gritted her teeth and sold her jewelry and belongings to sponsor it, which was considered a private sponsorship. Because neither her husband Ferdinand II nor the Parliament of the Kingdom of Castile approved the plan, nor were they willing to provide money. Therefore, funding Columbus's voyage actually used the Queen's private money. Without Columbus's voyage to the west, there would be no rise of the European voyage. Therefore, Queen Isabella I is a strong woman with foresight and pioneering spirit. In Spain, in the combination of the two kings and couples, the think tank is not the husband Ferdinand II, but the wife Isabella I. Although Ferdinand II is very capable, he is more reflected in his execution ability. Many of Spain's decisions were actually proposed by Isabella I, and then implemented by Ferdinand II. Even several political marriages that had a great impact on Europe were decisions made by Isabella I. For example, the marriage with Portugal almost unified the Iberian Peninsula. And the marriage with Austria, in the original history, gave rise to a monster that swept across Europe, the union of the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, an existence that dominated all of Europe. It's a pity that the union of the Holy Roman Empire and Spain only existed during the reign of Charles V. When Charles V died, the two families separated. Otherwise, this powerful dynasty will continue to dominate all of Europe. Of course, this is no wonder. Originally in history, Charles V wanted to pass everything to his son Philip II. Unfortunately, the princes of the Holy Roman Empire did not do it. You know, during the reign of Charles V, if it were not for the struggle with the French, the confrontation with the Ottoman Turks, and the religious wars, which consumed too much of Charles V's energy, maybe Charles V could have gotten rid of all the great princes of Germany and established the hereditary Habsburg Germany. Out of concern that their power might be deprived, the German princes decisively chose Charles V's brother Ferdinand I as the Holy Roman Emperor and forcibly split the union of the Spanish Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. It was precisely because the German princes split this extremely powerful union for their own interests. Since then, neither Spain nor the Holy Roman Empire has the strength to beat France, but Alsace and Lorraine have been cut off by France. Once, Marin was moved when he saw The Last Lesson written by the Frenchman Daudet. But in fact, Alsace has always been a German-dominated region, even in the 21st century. The so-called situation described by Daudet that the Alsatians were forced to give up French and learn German does not exist at all. Because the locals all speak German. Only the French immigrants would think as described in the book. However, there are very few such people in Alsace. Therefore, Daudet's The Last Lesson is actually a very shameless political propaganda, which is completely nonsense. But our Chinese textbooks regard this article as a classic. Well, whether it is the translator who's sure or the person who selected this article for the Chinese textbook, they may not know much about the history of France and Germany, so they regard this text as a good article. Of course, this is also closely related to the fact that Germany was defeated in both world wars. The French are the victors, and of course they work hard to promote their ideas. Just like if Japan had won that year, maybe our school textbooks would have described the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. The death of Isabella I represents the death of Spain's pioneering spirit. Although Ferdinand II is talented, he has a short-sighted vision and is entangled in the hegemony of the Italian region. As for Prince Juan, who is still alive, he is usually closer to Ferdinand II. Of course, he was also greatly influenced by Ferdinand II. As a result, Prince Juan seemed to be more concerned about European issues. And Prince Juan's wife Margaret, although very talented and a strong woman. However, her heart is still very much inclined towards Austria. Therefore, she will also encourage Prince Juan to help Austria and the French fight. Marin has dealt with Prince Juan and found that this person has a good temper, but he has no opinions and is easily influenced by his father and wife. Therefore, when Ferdinand II dies, Prince Juan will definitely be the next Tang Gaozong Li Jie king who is controlled by his wife. Of course, now that Isabella I has passed away, Prince Juan will soon be crowned King of Castile. After the death of Isabella I, Spain will usher in a situation of co-governance between father and son, and a new era has arrived. Chapter 379. Something unexpected happened. Since the Venetians decided to keep a low profile, they responded quickly. Leonardo Loredan, the governor of Venice, quickly sent a special envoy to Rome to meet with Julius II and request reconciliation. Marin also explained to Julius II the benefits of reconciliation with Venice at this time, so Julius II accepted Venice's surrender with a smile, and the two sides agreed on a timetable for the transfer of the Rimini area. However, as one of the conditions for exchange, the Republic of Venice hopes that the Papal States will allow Venetian merchant ships to dock at Rimini and Ravenna, two important port cities in the Adriatic Sea, in the Rimini area and continue to do business. After all, for a commercial country like the Republic of Venice, the reason for occupying Rimini and Ravenna is mainly for commercial considerations. If the Holy See allows Venetian merchants to continue to do business in the two port cities of Rimini and Ravenna, the loss to Venice is not too great. Julius II does not exclude Venetian merchants from doing business in the two port cities, because the entry and exit of merchant ships and the commercial activities of Venetian merchants can also bring taxes. Therefore, the two sides quickly reached a peace agreement and determined the timetable for the transfer of territory. However, Marin suddenly remembered one thing: without the famous Cambrai League in history, how could Maximilian I be crowned as emperor? And Maximilian I could not get the super favorable condition that the future emperor did not have to come to Rome for coronation. But, who cares, it's not his bad luck. Moreover, Marin knew very well that his father-in-law Julius II would never smash this good card in his hand. During his reign, he would definitely find a way to use this as a condition to use the Habsburg family once. At the same time, in Groningen, the capital of West Frisia, the war situation was a little unexpected. The army of the Principality of Guedes actually abandoned the city and fled. It was a real defeat, not a trick. Speaking of it, it is really not the fault of Marshal Bonnets and his soldiers who are incompetent, but it is really an accident. The story starts with a big businessman in Groningen, Niel Ruyspen. Niel Ruyspen is a big businessman in Groningen, and at the same time, he is also a very timid person. In recent years, Groningen has changed hands several times, which made Niel Ruyspen terrified, fearing that one day, the family's wealth would be robbed by those chaotic soldiers, and even his family would be killed. So Niel Ruyspen organized his men to quietly dig a tunnel in the old house at home to hide and conceal property. At the beginning, this tunnel was not long, limited to under the house, just to hide property and family. But over the years, Niel Ruyspen's men dug a distance when they had nothing to do. Although the progress was slow due to the difficulty in transporting soil, it took a long time. Before the Saxon coalition and the army of the Principality of Guedes went to war, this tunnel had already led to a small forest in the north of the city. Niel Ruyspen didn't understand military affairs, and didn't know that the army in the city was from the Principality of Guedes, including thousands of powerful Swiss mercenaries. He thought that this army was still led by the former Frisian nobles. After all, after the Duke of Guedes captured the former governor of the Frisian noble republic, Fiskfrigide, he still used him as a puppet leader. Therefore, in the eyes of Niel Ruyspen, who didn't know the inside story, West Frisia was still led by the former governor. Although I don't know why I was able to defeat the Saxon army last time, this time the Saxons gathered more than 20,000 people, and the defenders in the city were only more than 10,000, so they should be unstoppable. Just like that, after the siege, Niel Ruyspen, who was pessimistic about the future, decided to take his wife and children and escape through the secret passage. After all, the Saxon coalition did not surround the area north of the city. Unfortunately, although the Saxon army did not surround the area north of the city because they were afraid of dispersing their forces, they still sent cavalry to patrol the north of the city regularly. Not long after Niel Ruyspen and his family came out of the tunnel, they encountered the patrolling cavalry of Saxony. Then, the whole family was captured alive by the Saxon army. Niel Ruyspen was timid. After being brought to George's tent, he was slightly frightened and told everything about how he escaped from the city. When George learned that Niel Ruyspen had dug a tunnel connecting the city and the outside of the city, his eyes suddenly lit up. Although George had not read the Chinese military books, he had heard of the story of the famous Trojan horse in ancient Greece. Obviously, George also understood the great benefits of internal and external cooperation. These days, although George brought a lot of artillery to bombard the city walls and gates, it was useless. Because Groningen was originally a strong city. And several city gates were replaced with large iron gates, ignoring the impact of iron balls and shells. Therefore, if you want to break the city, you can only pile up lives to climb the wall. However, the army of Guedes is not much less than that of the Saxon coalition. If the loss of the strong attack is too great, even if you break in, you may be beaten out. When George was having a headache, Niel Ruyspen appeared in front of him like an angel, and sent a tunnel leading to the city. So, George conducted a few days of special training in the army to let the soldiers adapt to the night battle environment. A few days later, George sent hundreds of elite knights, wearing full sets of plate armor, and entered the city through the secret passage. At the same time, the Saxon army also quietly came to the north gate. Because the old house of Niel Ruyspen's family is close to the north gate. In the middle of the night, the battle started. The army of the Principality of Guedes was not well prepared, and it was a night attack, so it was inevitable that they were in a panic. Fortunately, Marshal Bonnets was calm in the face of things, and the Swiss mercenaries had also seen big scenes. Under the command of Marshal Bonnets, a group of elite Swiss mercenaries quickly gathered together and resisted the impact of the Saxon coalition in the streets. In this narrow street, the cold weapon troops confronted each other and could not quickly win. Taking this opportunity, Marshal Bonnets quickly gathered the defeated soldiers and regrouped. Originally, Marshal Bonnets wanted to drive the Saxon coalition out of the city. Unfortunately, after the enemy's attack, the army of the Principality of Guedes lost all its fighting spirit. In desperation, Marshal Bonitz, who originally had 14,000 main forces and 3,000 former West Frisian resistance soldiers, evacuated Groningen from the West Gate with less than 10,000 people. The Saxon coalition outside the West Gate originally wanted to stop them. Unfortunately, this army was either Swiss mercenaries or the elite of the Principality of Gettys. It just so happened that the ragtag army in the Saxon coalition was responsible for blocking the West Gate. After being charged by these elite troops, they were immediately defeated. In fact, those who were led out of the city by Marshal Bonitz were all powerful elites. Unfortunately, after being frightened by the enemy's night attack, they had no fighting spirit at the moment and were in a panic. Otherwise, with these 10,000 people, even if they could not win, they could still resist the attack of the Saxon coalition and remain undefeated. George, Duke of Saxony, was not clear about the situation of the army of the Duchy of Guedes, but he knew very well that the coalition killed and captured 6,000 to 7,000 people in the city, and less than 10,000 escaped. The Saxon army had more than 21,000 people at this time. So, after leaving 1,000 people to guard the city and look at the prisoners, he took the remaining 20,000 troops and immediately launched a pursuit of Bonitz's army, intending to completely destroy it and bring permanent peace to West Frisia. Chapter 380, A Tragic Victory. Marshal Bonitz led an army of less than 10,000 people, fighting and retreating all the way westward. In fact, the morale of the Guedes army was restored during the day of the next day, and they were ready for a fight. However, this was useless. Because when retreating from Groningen in a hurry, Bonitz's army did not bring out a single grain of food. If it were a few hundred people, maybe they could barely find a village to solve the problem. However, he brought nearly 10,000 troops with him. So, even if the soldiers were no longer panicked, Bonitz, as a qualified commander, knew very well that his first task at the moment was to find food so that tens of thousands of troops would not starve. What's worse, Sieg's 5,000 Swiss mercenaries, who were responsible for going out of the city to circle and ambush the Saxon coalition, only brought enough food for 5,000 of his men to eat for 10 days. Therefore, at this moment, Marshal Bonitz could not ask Sieg for help to get food. For this reason, Bonitz did not care about fighting with the Saxon coalition, and went westward to find towns with food to get supplies. However, in order to prepare for war, Bonitz had already received most of the food from the towns near Groningen in the city of Groningen. This time, it was like shooting himself in the foot. In desperation, Bonitz forcibly requisitioned the food reserves of several towns on the escape route, but it was only enough for a few days. Therefore, under desperation, Bonitz had to lead the army to set up a defense line every time he arrived in a town to resist the attack of the Saxon coalition. Then, he searched for food in the town. After searching for food, he immediately looked for an opportunity to retreat and go to the next town to get more food supplies. A few days later, when Bonitz's army was about to reach the central region, near the town of Malm, see, the King of German Mercenaries, Chapter 108, where Marin and Sieg's army jointly ambushed the army of the Frisian Noble Republic, Sieg, who had been moving his troops in the south, suddenly realized something. So, Sieg rode his horse with a few personal soldiers and was the first to catch up with Bonitz's main force. Captain Sieg, what is your intention here now? Bonitz didn't quite understand why Sieg abandoned his army and came to him, so he was a little confused. It's like this, Lord Bonitz, do you know where the town ahead is? Malm, the scouts have already reported it. Yes, Malm, back then, I was hired by Duke Marin, and it was here that I used the streets and houses to ambush the main force of the Frisian Noble Republic. Marshal Bonitz raised his eyebrows and asked, Captain Sieg means that we will also set up an ambush in the town of Malm? Sieg shook his head and said, impossible, this battle and reward are different. Last time, our army had 3,000 people and the enemy had more than 2,000, which added up to more than 5,000 people. Even so, the town of Malm could not bear it. This time, the number of armies on both sides is too large. The other side has 20,000 people, and your main force has nearly 10,000 people. It is impossible to set up an ambush in such a small town. What do you mean? Bonitz was a little confused. Lord Bonitz, do you know why Duke Marin chose this place to ambush? Bonitz shook his head of course. How could he know the details of Marin's deeds? Sieg nodded and said, it's mainly because Malm is the main east-west traffic route in West Frisia, with a Roman road running across it. The most important thing is that there are vast swamps to the north and south of Malm, and it's impossible for troops to pass through. Therefore, even if we can't ambush in Malm, we can deploy troops in this area to resist the Saxon coalition. I've seen the local terrain. If you deploy troops in the open space east of the town, you can put 2,000 soldiers in the front to resist the attack of the Saxon coalition and wear down the enemy's morale. When the enemy's morale declines, I can lead the troops and suddenly appear from the rear of the enemy and crush the enemy. As he spoke, the army quickly arrived at Malm. Bonnet briefly observed the terrain of Malm and had to admit that it was indeed very suitable for blocking the attack of the Saxon coalition. After all, in addition to the large swamps to the north and south, there was only this small town in the middle that had a road. At that time, as long as the middle road is controlled, the Saxon coalition army can be blocked from going west. So, Marshal Bonnet led the army and quickly controlled the town of Malm, and deployed more than 2,000 troops at the intersection east of the town to block the coalition's attack. Then, Sieg and his men rode back, intending to wait for the two armies to collide for a while, and then suddenly attack the flank of the Saxon coalition with his army, and strive to defeat the enemy's main force. The next day, George arrived with 20,000 troops and launched a crazy attack on the defenders. However, there was only one road to Malm, and it was impossible to send troops to detour and encircle from the north and south. Therefore, despite the absolute advantage in manpower, the Saxon coalition army could not break through the defense line of the Guide's army. 2 days later, George, Duke of Saxony, suddenly began to keep his troops in place at the suggestion of his generals. Why? Because the Saxons realized that the enemy seemed to have little food. Since it is difficult to attack by force, it is better to drag it out first, consume the opponent's food, and wait until the opponent collapses automatically. In the days that followed, the attack of the Saxon army began to become loud thunder, little rain. On the fourth day, the 5,000 Swiss mercenaries led by Sieg finally rushed to the rear of the Saxon coalition and saw the two armies in a fierce battle. But what Sieg didn't know was that the Saxon coalition seemed to be attacking fiercely on the surface, but in fact, it was just a show. Only Marshal Bonnet, who was stationed in the town of Malm, felt the perfunctory attack of the Saxon coalition in the past 2 days. However, he had no way to send the news to Sieg through the Saxon coalition's front. Without knowing why, Sieg rashly launched an attack on the rear of the Saxon coalition in the fierce battle. At the beginning, the rear of the Saxon coalition was indeed in chaos for a while, and Duke George was also panicked for a while. But then, Duke George was overjoyed. Because he knew that these 5,000 people were probably the last trump card of the opponent. So, after George commanded a small number of coalition soldiers to block the Guide's army in the town of Malm, he led the main force and killed Sieg's army. Sieg was stunned, not knowing why the enemy dared to abandon the opponent in front and turn to attack him with all his strength. However, the excellent military qualities formed over a long period of time made him immediately order his 5,000 soldiers to form a defensive formation to resist the impact of the main force of the Saxon coalition. Although the Swiss mercenaries were more powerful, the 5,000 Swiss mercenaries suffered heavy losses in the face of the impact of the elite Saxon soldiers with a high armor rate, and lost more than 900 people in one day. Marshal Bonnet also saw the crisis of Sieg's army. He knew very well that if Sieg's army was destroyed, the 10,000 people he led would not be able to escape. Because they were short of food. If they really ran out of food, the other side would definitely win. In desperation, Marshal Bonnet decided to make a final desperate struggle. That night, all the nearly 10,000 troops in Malm, after eating and drinking their fill, bravely launched a fierce charge towards the Saxon coalition camp with spears in hand. In order to boost morale, Marshal Bonnet personally went to the battlefield and charged with the soldiers. The passionate shouts resounded through the night sky and also reached the camp of Sieg's Swiss mercenaries. That is, Marshal Bonnet's army launched an attack. Sieg was surprised at first, but then he understood. If Marshal Bonnet didn't fight hard at this time, and waited until he was defeated, the Guide's army would be completely defeated. So, regardless of his own fatigue and the fatigue of his soldiers, Sieg immediately gathered his troops and took advantage of the night to kill towards the camp of the Saxon coalition. Originally, Duke George's Saxon coalition was still very confident in resisting Bonnet's army. Because the narrow terrain of the town of Malm not only blocked the offensive of the Saxon coalition, but also hindered the counterattack of Marshal Bonnet's army. Therefore, the Saxon coalition only needed to send 4,000 elite troops, plus the solid camp, to steadily block Marshal Bonnet's counterattack. However, despite his own fatigue, Corps Commander Sieg led the remaining 4,000 troops from the east, forming a pincer attack. Suddenly, the soldiers of the Saxon coalition were a little panicked. They didn't know which army to stop first, and the crazy shouting of the soldiers led by Marshal Bonnet also affected the morale of the Saxon coalition. After a night of fierce fighting, Marshal Bonnet finally succeeded in breaking through the defense line of the Saxon coalition, broke into the Saxon coalition camp, and defeated the main force of the coalition. And Sieg's more than 4,000 people also risked their lives to break through the east gate of the coalition, which had a huge impact on the Saxon coalition. After all, the Swiss are not good at fighting. In the desperate hand-to-hand combat with the Saxon coalition, the Swiss are superior. Moreover, the most elite plate armor knights of the Saxon army were useless in the chaotic camp at night. When daybreak came, although more than half of the casualties were paid, and even Marshal Bonnet himself was wounded in 3 places, the Guides' army finally defeated the Saxon coalition. But the magical thing is that Duke George seemed to have the help of gods. At the last moment, he actually led 1,000 Saxon knights, riding war horses, from the northeast, the weak point of Sieg's mercenary group's attack, and killed a bloody road and escaped. If Marin knew about it, he would definitely comment, "Damn, is George an indestructible cockroach?"